seven hated management practices. Now, I've written in here for knowledge workers because some of these practices are not as hated in what I would call more traditional work environments. But for knowledge workers, people who are doing, for example, software development, marketing, any kind of creative work, design work, and actually for that matter, for managers, these practices are really, really challenging and largely hated. So individual performance reviews. Now, I have been subject to individual performance reviews myself a long time ago now, but nevertheless. And I have attempted to do individual performance reviews as a manager. And I've also interviewed many managers over the years about this. And this is really probably the single most hated thing in organizations that still do it. Not every organization does anymore. It used to be universal. Now there's growing recognition that this is not such a great idea. I was talking to some executives at a client just last week, no, 2 weeks ago, and this topic came up. One of the executives was like, hey, how do we do individual performance reviews? And it was a software organization, by the way. What are the metrics we look at? And I may have, well, the great thing about being a consultant is that you can say things that maybe people can't say to each other internally. But I said, look, honestly, there is no good metric for performance measurement in knowledge workers as individuals. How do you measure productivity or quality or any of these other things when really what matters is at the team or organization level, how much customers love the work you're doing? That's what really matters. How much return on investment do you have? How much, how fast are you getting work out into the marketplace to, either respond to or even beat competitors? And none of that is individual. Now, it's not to say that every individual just gets a free pass. And we'll talk about this maybe a bit later, but the concept of individual performance reviews where you have, KPIs or OKRs or, individual goal setting or whatever it happens to be at the individual level tends to be pretty hated, especially if it's done annually. If you're going to do performance measurement, do it at the team level and don't push it down to the individual level. It's almost always a bad idea. Individual outcome-based goal setting. Some of you might have heard of results-oriented work environments, ROW. This idea is that, you know what, we care about the outcomes. Yes, of course you do. Of course. There's a bit of a problem, though. When we're talking about knowledge work, your individual contributors cannot control outcomes. They can influence them, they can contribute to outcomes, but they cannot control outcomes. And so setting individual outcome-based goals is almost always a really awful, demotivating thing to do to people. Okay. Your staff cannot control how they get from where they are to the outcome. Now, we also have an alternative, which is activity-based goal setting. That's slightly better sometimes, right? Like, oh, how many sales calls do you make? Okay, you can't necessarily control the outcome of each call, but there's some statistical things you can say about making a number of sales calls, and you can kind of gradually get better. or, you know, with marketing, hey, how many people are we going to get to sign up to our newsletter? You know, there's activities that contribute to that, but controlling the outcome is almost always impossible in knowledge work. Related to goals, imposing arbitrary deadlines. Okay, so an arbitrary deadline is a deadline that is related to some sort of internal organizational need, like the executive says so, or we've got a quarterly report that we need to make our numbers for, or you know, that department over there needs something by this date. Well, why? There are some deadlines which are legitimate, okay? And I want to point out that there is such a thing as a natural deadline. And those are okay. A natural deadline is something like, hey, you know what? Our best season for business is the Christmas season. We need to launch our new products. Otherwise, you know, we're toast, right? We're you know, we're going to go out of business if we don't get our products out for the Christmas shopping season, right? That's a natural deadline. You can't change Christmas. So natural deadlines, okay. Almost most deadline setting though is arbitrary, and we basically just can't do that. People struggle with task switching in the best of times if you give people too many different things to work on at the same time. And by the way, this can come about very naturally and innocently, right? You might forget what you've previously asked people to do. And so we have to be very careful about this, because when we overload people, usually their productivity and their focus goes down exponentially, not just linearly. Like if someone's working on 5 things, it doesn't mean they're 1/5 as fast on each one. It means they're like a 10th as fast on each one, or a 20th, because of task switching, overhead, and so forth, and just the stress of it. And that applies also, by the way, to you as a manager and your relationship with your bosses. That's a whole other discussion, but overloading people with work is an awful thing to do as a manager. A stretch goal is a goal that your staff have already said we can't do. Okay, they've said, yes, we can do something. You know, they said, yeah, this is a goal, we can do it. A stretch goal is you saying to them, hey, look, why don't we just try to go a little bit further? And so that's actually patronizing, it's disrespectful, it's demotivating, and in most cases, it ends badly. Now, the reason that stretch goals are popular is because, again, there is a healthy way to do this, which is self-set stretch goals. Right? So if an individual says, you know what, our goal is X, but I'm going to do X plus 1, that's okay. But they don't talk about it. They don't commit to it. It's not imposed. Right? But if you as a manager set a stretch goal for your staff or your team, individuals, really, really demotivating practice. Micromanagement, this is the idea of creating lots and lots of detailed tasks for people, checking in with them daily or hourly, and directing them to say, hey, do this next, do this next, do this next, et cetera, et cetera. And usually what happens in knowledge work especially is that despite the fact that you're very, very smart, you're not quite as smart as the people actually doing the work. And they would do something different, and it would be better. Now, that's 90% of the time. The problem is that as managers, we're often more experienced. And so we have this kind of weird confirmation bias that says, you know what? I know better. I'm more experienced. I know that that should be done differently. And so you interfere, you micromanage. Um, hey, it happens to me. I love telling people what to do. I've been in this agile environment for years and years and years and years, and I still forget, and sometimes get into that micromanagement mode. It's natural. It's very common, but it's something we have to constantly fight against because it's almost always suboptimal. Okay, it almost always is worse for productivity, worse for quality, and of course, worse for motivation, obviously. Managers assigning tasks to the best individual. And so when you single out people as a manager to do things because you think they're the best person for the work, often what you're doing is you're implicitly telling other people that they're not the best. And they start to think, hey, why is that person doing that? Or I could do that better. Or, jealousy, or, feeling a little bit insulted. It's almost always better to present a task to your team and ask the team, hey, who's the best person to do this right now under the current circumstances? Okay. They often, or almost always, know better than you.